All right, so welcome everyone to the deep dive. We're taking a look today, end of March 2025, at what's going on across TV, film, media globally. It seems like, the whole entertainment landscape is always changing how things get made, how we watch them.
Yeah, it really does feel like it's constantly in motion.
Yeah.
And I think you've pulled together a really interesting set of sources for this deep dive.
Mhm.
We've got news about what's actually being produced. We have, the strategies that the streaming platforms are taking, what's happening with creators online, some important conversation around diversity in Hollywood, and even, some of the more difficult challenges that people who work in the industry are facing.
Yeah, it is a pretty comprehensive look, I think, and that's what makes it so interesting to dig into. So our aim today is really to kind of take all these different pieces, all these stories, and see if we can, pull out some bigger themes. Like what are the most important things happening, and what might it tell us about how we're all going to be entertained, in the years to come. So one of the things that jumped out at me right away was this. I guess you could say continued reliance on established stories and characters, using what people call IP, existing intellectual property.
Yeah.
Like, taking a book or an old show and turning it into something new.
It's a really dominant trend.
Yeah.
And it's, we see it right off the bat with this news about Bruna Perpandrea adapting Leanne Moriarty's book, The Last Anniversary, for Foxtel and Binge.
Right.
And Moriarty's someone who has a track record of success with things like Big Little Lies, Nine Perfect Strangers.
Yeah.
Both of those were, turned into very successful productions. And this new project involves Nicole Kidman's company, Blossom Films, and director John Polson. So it does speak to the appeal of, going with an author and a story that already has a built-in audience.
And it seems to be, part of a bigger pattern, right? Because one of the things we see in the data here is that between 2020 and 2024, only about 12% of new releases were actually based on original concepts. But those projects that were based on existing IP, they really seem to have captured the most viewership and really dominated, at the box office. Why do you think that is? Is it just is it all about minimizing risk, in a kind of uncertain market?
I mean, that's definitely a big factor. I think, the article we have here suggests that there was this kind of post-COVID caution in Hollywood,
Yeah.
a move towards, familiar things when the theatrical market was so unpredictable. And franchises especially offer this perception of being a safer bet financially.
Right.
And then you have to consider the audience as well.
Yes.
In uncertain times, people often, gravitate toward things that they already know and enjoy. But I do think it's important to remember some of the exceptions that are highlighted here, like John Wick and The White Lotus. These were both very original ideas that managed to break through and achieve some really big success.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be this kind of tension, I think, between the comfort of what we know and then, the potential excitement of something completely new.
Yeah. And it's not that originality is dead, but it's definitely facing a tougher battle, to get made.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shift gears a little bit and think about, where some of those new ideas might be coming from. One of the other big things we're seeing is this increasing overlap between, the traditional Hollywood world and the creator economy, especially online platforms like YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting space to watch. We have Andrew Yaffe, the CEO of Dude Perfect, actually talking about this, how these YouTube channels actually generate revenue and importantly, what some of the limitations are with that model.
Right.
And he really highlights the advantages that come with, partnering with a Hollywood studio, the things that they can bring, like much bigger budgets, obviously, and also access to, audiences beyond just your existing YouTube subscribers. And also, there's this kind of added prestige that comes with that traditional media recognition.
Yeah. And it's a two-way street, right? Because, Hollywood is really interested in these YouTubers who have, these massive, incredibly engaged fan bases.
Yeah.
It's almost like a direct line to an audience that maybe is consuming entertainment very differently than traditional TV viewers.
Right. Exactly. And we have, some specific examples of this convergence happening. Jimmy, Mr. D. Donaldson's Beast Games on Amazon Prime Video is cited here as being a really successful collaboration. Oh. And, he's not alone. We also have, folks like Mrs. Rachel, Do Perfect themselves, and Mark Rober all partnering with streaming platforms. So it's clearly a strategy, to try and attract that younger demographic. But yeah, what do you see as some of the potential challenges or pitfalls that might come up with these kinds of collaborations?
Well, the article does touch on a few key things. There's this need to balance that creative freedom that these creators are used to, with the platform's requirements, and maybe more importantly, how to integrate promotions for the platform itself seamlessly.
Yeah.
Without sort of turning off the creator's core audience. It's a delicate balance, right?
It is. And this is where Ted Sarandos' comments come in, right? Comparing Netflix's approach to YouTube.
Yeah.
And the way he frames it is really interesting. He talks about viewers spending time on Netflix, whereas he says they're killing time on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
So he's pretty critical of YouTube's reliance on advertising for revenue. And he really wants to emphasize Netflix's commitment to what he calls higher quality professional content.
Mm-hmm.
And basically he's aiming to capture a big chunk of overall TV viewing time. So it raises the question, is this a valid distinction, in the media landscape that we're in now?
It's a bold statement, that's for sure. And YouTube obviously has this huge scale and reach, and they certainly didn't just let that comment slide, did they?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Neil Mohan, the CEO of YouTube, he pointed out that TV viewership in the U.S. has actually surpassed smartphone usage recently.
Interesting.
So that's a pretty big counterpoint,
Yeah.
to Sarandos' claim. And then Kurt Wilms, who's over at YouTube as well, he chimed in too and said that creators are responding to this by making higher quality, longer videos that are really designed for viewing on a TV screen. So while Sarandos is drawing this line in the sand, it sounds like YouTube's also moving into that spending time category.
Yeah.
So it suggests there might be a convergence in content strategy as well as how people are consuming it.
And it's also interesting to see, YouTube taking these steps to try and make sure that the content on their platform, is good quality and authentic. There was that recent crackdown on those AI-generated fake movie trailers, and also demonetizing some channels, for spreading misinformation.
Yeah.
It really highlights how aware they are of the need to, maintain trust with users, especially as they try to attract more of those TV viewers. It's almost like there's this growing sense of responsibility that comes with that kind of scale.
Absolutely. And the whole issue of these AI trailers, mimicking official marketing, it's a tricky one. I mean, some studios might have, benefited from the initial buzz and even some of the ad revenue that it generated.
Yeah.
But the potential is there to really mislead viewers and erode trust over time.
Yeah.
So YouTube's emphasis on, wanting original non-deceptive content, it's a pretty clear sign that their standards are evolving.
Right.
As they start to compete more directly with those more traditional platforms.
Okay. Let's move on to an area that I think is really crucial, which is diversity and representation in Hollywood. And it's actually encouraging to see projects like Apple TV Plus #1 on the call sheet documentary series, actually coming to fruition.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about this series is that it's specifically looking at the history and the impact of Black actors in Hollywood. It's not just about, individual achievements. It's about recognizing the long journey, the incredible resilience and the progress that's been made.
Right.
And with directors like Reginald Hudlin and Shola Lynch involved, and featuring icons like Will Smith, Jamie Foxx, Angela Bassett, it's clearly intended to be both a celebration and a source of inspiration for the next generation. Do you think these kinds of projects are actually moving the needle, in terms of representation behind the camera as well?
That is a really key question, isn't it? And then on the scripted side, we have Netflix developing a sequel pilot to A Different World, that focuses on Dwayne and Whitley's daughter. She's now at an HBCU, and that original show had such a huge cultural impact.
Yeah.
So bringing it back with Felicia Pride writing and Debbie Allen directing, it feels like a really smart way to connect with, the original fans, but also bring in a whole new generation of viewers.
The challenge, but also the really exciting part, I think, is going to be, capturing that tone and that chemistry that the original show had.
Yeah.
While also, authentically reflecting what it's like to be a student at an HBCU now in 2025.
Right.
It's it's a delicate balance to strike. But the people involved, the talent involved, it suggests that there's a lot of potential there, for it to be successful and to further diversify the stories that we're seeing on screen.
So, these developments on the representation front are definitely positive steps, but our sources also, they highlight some of the really big challenges and transformations that are happening behind the scenes in the industry. And one example of this is the launch of Producers United, which is really interesting. It was started by some pretty big names, and it really shows the struggles that Hollywood producers are facing right now.
Yeah, this alliance, it was formed by folks like Stephen Love, Kathy Schulman, Jennifer Todd, Jonathan Wang, all very well-respected producers. And it really highlights this growing sense of economic insecurity, and a feeling that they're not being fairly compensated or recognized for the absolutely crucial role that they play in getting things made. They're specifically trying to address things like development fees, which have been kind of stagnant, and access to health insurance, and really pushing back against this perception that producers are, all financially stable. Especially because those back-end deals, the profit participation, has really been shrinking.
Yeah.
So the pandemic and the strikes have definitely, made all of this even more difficult. So it makes you wonder, what's the long-term impact going to be on the quality of content?
Yeah.
And also, on the diversity of the content that's being made.
Yeah, it paints a much different picture than the sort of glamour that we see on screen, doesn't it? And it's connected to another trend that was mentioned in one of our sources, this idea of a Gen X career meltdown that's happening in creative fields like media and design and advertising.
It's a really thought-provoking idea, for a generation that came of age and really built their careers in a world that was largely analog. Right, where expertise was based on specific skills that they had worked hard to develop. These rapid technological changes and the way the industry is transforming, it's making some people feel like those skills are becoming less relevant or even obsolete.
Right.
And the term lessness is used to describe that sense of diminished opportunity and relevance, even though they have all this experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
It's really highlighting this kind of human cost of how quickly things are changing, with technology.
It really is. It makes you think about the impact on individuals,
Yeah.
both personally and professionally. And speaking of big industry shifts, the impact of Netflix on Australia's content industry is a really interesting case study, I think.
It seems like it's kind of a mixed bag from what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, Netflix has definitely played a huge role in expanding local production in Australia, and also giving those Australian stories much more international exposure, through their platform.
Right.
But on the other hand, their presence is putting a lot of pressure on budgets locally. And it's disrupting the traditional ways that films and shows were financed and distributed. So there's this prediction that we're going to see more hybrid distribution models, more international co-productions, and there's even, talk about potential regulatory reform. So it seems like the Australian media industry is still trying to figure out, what their place is in this new landscape, and how to make it work in a sustainable way.
And we see globally, these kinds of adaptations happening. I mean, the profile of Gaumont, Germany under Sabine Demart is a really good example of how established production companies are kind of navigating this changing world of TV drama,
Yeah, and it seems like your strategy of focusing on these diverse, high-quality series and really emphasizing European collaboration is a pretty successful model for how to adapt in the current market. They've had success with Barbarians for Netflix, The Interpreter of Silence, and it shows they can cater to different platforms and different audiences. And then their upcoming slate of projects is really interesting. There's Bone Palace, Parallel Me, even a Heidi reboot.
Yeah.
So they're committed to telling a variety of stories that can really resonate beyond national borders.
Okay, let's talk about something that affects all of us, as viewers directly, which is the whole streaming experience itself. And it sounds like there's a growing sense of frustration with how hard it's becoming to actually find things to watch. Like the discoverability problem is getting worse.
Absolutely. And we have people like Evan Shapiro and Marion Ranchit who are really highlighting this. It's a pain point for a lot of people. You subscribe to these platforms, but there's so much content. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to actually find something that you want to watch. So the rise of these super apps like Roku and Amazon is kind of presented as a potential solution here
Okay.
because they offer, a more centralized, more user-friendly way to navigate this sea of content. But it does bring up questions about, platform power and gatekeeping.
Right.
What do you think about these super apps? Do you think they're a good solution for the average viewer?
I think it's a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
You get convenience, but then there's also the potential for your choices to be limited or, being subject to some kind of algorithmic bias. And then we see these more out there solutions being proposed, like Swipe Finder, which is this Tinder style app for finding content.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
It's a novel approach for sure.
It is. It's essentially gamifying discovery.
Yeah.
And it could potentially, create new ways for streamers to make money from their content through recommendations. But it speaks to this fundamental need for, faster, more intuitive, and maybe even more visual ways to sift through all this content.
Yeah.
Whether something like that will catch on, is still up in the air.
Yeah.
But it just shows how aware the industry is of this problem.
And Netflix, as we mentioned earlier, is looking beyond just, video content. Their expansion into gaming is pretty significant.
It is. And under Elaine Taskin, they're really making a serious effort to make games part of that whole Netflix ecosystem.
Oh.
They've got this huge subscriber base already, and their plan is to offer games directly on TV screens.
Yeah.
They've even got interesting titles in development like Spirit Crossing. So the goal is to create this more complete, more engaging experience for users. They have admitted that it's been a bit of a challenge to gain traction in the gaming world, but they're continuing to invest, and they're exploring new technologies and trends, which shows that they're committed to this for the long haul.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and
Well,
whether it really becomes this seamless part of the Netflix experience for most people. And finally, we have some interesting behind the scenes developments and some projects that are in the works. One thing that caught my eye was the news that Citadel season 2 has been delayed. And they've actually paused those spin-offs that they were planning, which suggests that even these big budget attempts to build these interconnected universes can face some pretty big hurdles.
yeah, there are reports that they had creative and production challenges that led to the delay of season 2,
Okay.
and then they've put the spin-offs on hold indefinitely. So it just shows how complex it can be to manage these big interconnected stories.
Right.
And also how audience reaction to that first installment, if it's mixed, can really impact, whether those future expansions are going to be viable.
So, on a more positive note, for those who are maybe interested in getting involved in the industry, there's a BBC Studios webinar that's focusing on the role of assistant directing in TV drama. And Screen Ireland is looking for script editors for their Perspectives initiative, which is supporting, diverse Irish feature films.
Right.
So both of those are good signs, that there are opportunities out there for people who are aspiring to work in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the recognition that films and series are getting at these prestigious festivals like Series Mania and CPHDOX is a good sign too. It shows that there's a lot of diverse and interesting stories being told all around the world.
Mhm.
The winners that are mentioned here really show the breadth of genres and the different types of narratives that are being produced. And then for those of you who like a little bit of horror, Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill, they're adapting Road of Bones for Skeen Gems, and those are the folks who did Sinister and the Black Phone. So that could be a pretty chilling addition to the horror genre.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it sounds good. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like there are a few key themes that have emerged, right? We've got this ongoing tension between, the appeal of using existing IP, which is seen as safer, and the need to keep coming up with new original ideas to keep things fresh and interesting.
Mhm.
We've also got this blurring of the lines between, online creators and traditional Hollywood, which is leading to, both opportunities and challenges. The business models and the whole user experience of streaming is still very much in flux, and the industry is still on this path toward, better representation and more diverse storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
and I think if we zoom out a little bit and think about the bigger picture, for you, the listener, these aren't just isolated things that are happening. They're
Mhm.
really reflecting broader changes in technology and how people are behaving as consumers,
Right.
and also, how our values as a culture are changing. So the entertainment industry is constantly adapting. And these news stories that we've talked about, they're like little snapshots, of that ongoing evolution.
That's a great way to put it. And it brings up a question for you listening. Thinking about all these different things that are happening and how they're all connected, what kind of content landscape do you see, in the next few years? What role do you think platforms and individual creators will play in shaping that? And what about you as a viewer? What are your demands going to be? How's that going to affect what you watch and how you choose to be entertained? It's something to think about as this story unfolds.
A lot to consider.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.